Okay.
Alright, I'm going to be talking about J.R.R. Tolkien and the Christian values, beliefs, and messages that are within his fantasy literature. Now, real quick, for those of you who don't know much about Tolkien, he was the author of the famous works such as The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings. If you're a big Tolkien nerd, you might have heard of the Silmarillion, probably not. He was a very devout Catholic, and the reason, well, that influenced his work, obviously, and that's what I'm going to be talking about, the messages, the Christian messages in his works. I put the date of his birth up there because that's also really important about the messages in his works, because he was born in 1892, so he fought in World War I, he lived through World War II, and he witnessed all the destruction that they caused. Real quick about allegory. So Tolkien himself actually talked about what I'm going to be talking about. He said, don't look for allegory in my works. In his foreword to the Lord of the Rings, he said, this is not allegorical. Don't try and find something. And what he was saying was, an example of that would be, don't say that the ring is, don't try and symbolize the ring as maybe an atomic bomb, which a lot of people did at first. And don't try and symbolize maybe the Dark Lord Sauron as Hitler. However, even though that wasn't like the thrust of his writing, because of who he was, because he was a Catholic, within this framework of his story, these Christian morals and beliefs were there, despite whether he wanted them to or not. I'll let you decide whether he did. The first one I'm going to talk about is stewardship. Stewardship is a very important Christian discipline, and the way that Tolkien represented this in his books were through environmentalism and advocacy for that. So he kind of demonized those who destroyed the environment. He demonized Sauron for destroying the trees, and he demonized all of those who were just ravaging the earth and not taking care of what God has given us. Another message was the rejection of materialism. Some people, or the obsession with power. So that's a problem that's relevant today. Like Christians may be obsessed with material things or obsessed with gaining power. And how he represented that in his books were through demonizing those who sought so much power, like Saruman and Sauron. They wanted the ring so bad. They were trying to gain this power, and they weren't caring for, this ties in also to stewardship, they weren't caring about the trees. All they cared about was the advancement of their armies for the sake of gaining more power. Another thing he talked about was just his views on war. Now, like I said earlier, he lived through World War II, he fought in World War I, so he witnessed firsthand, so that's part of the reason why these messages were in his writing. But another reason is just because he was a Catholic, and his view on war, a way he expressed that in one of his books, actually in The Two Towers, the second of the trilogy, he gave a line to the character Aragorn, and the character said, "War must be while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which I defend," which is a pretty basic explanation of what a lot of Catholics' views are on war. And although he wrote about war, he didn't praise war. He hated like the destruction it caused. Like he lived through those wars. So the Midlands, where he grew up in England, were just completely ravaged by the industrialization that was brought on by both world wars. He also even specifically talked about just faith issues. He talked about how it's not always easy to be a Christian. And the way he did this, he paralleled it in his works, was it's not easy to be a hero. He paralleled heroism with being a Christian. It's not always easy to be a hero, just like it's not always easy to be a Christian because of persecution or just because of, again, material things, being distracted. Another issue of faith that he talked about, which is something that I think many Christians struggle with is the idea of why do certain things happen? Why do bad things happen? If God's in control, what's going on? Why is this happening to me? And he actually explained this further. It's funny to think of it this way, but at times I've read this and kind of viewed it almost like a Bible passage, because it's a good representation or just a good way to think about why bad things happen. It's when the character Frodo is talking about how he doesn't like where he doesn't like what is happening. He's in a really bad situation, and it just really doesn't look good. And he's talking to a wise wizard, Gandalf. And what Frodo says is, he says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." And Gandalf replies with, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." And I think that's a really good way to rationalize or understand why everything is in God's control. So although Tolkien didn't write specifically about spiritual disciplines, his writings did contain these messages.